What if the most powerful army in the history of Arabia, thousands of soldiers, war elephants, weapons of destruction, a commander who believed no force on earth could stop him? What if that entire army was wiped out, not by another army, not by human weapons, not by any worldly power, but by birds? Small birds carrying tiny stones sent by the command of the one who controls everything? What if that moment, that miraculous, jaw-dropping, history-shattering moment was not just a random miracle, but was actually Allah preparing the world for the arrival of the greatest human being who ever lived? What if the destruction of Abraha's army and the birth of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in that same year were connected by a divine plan, so perfect, so precise, so breathtaking that when you understand it fully, it will change the way you see everything? Because here is what you need to know. What you are about to hear today is not just history. It is the story of why you exist, why this world exists, and why the mercy of Allah was sent in human form to walk among us. Stay with me, because by the end of this you will never see the world the same way again. What if everything you thought you knew about history was missing the most important chapter? What if the most significant event in human civilization was not a war, not the rise of an empire, not a scientific discovery, but the birth of one man in one city, in one specific year that Allah Himself chose before the creation of time itself? We are talking about the year of the elephant. We are talking about 570 CE. We are talking about a moment so profound, so divinely orchestrated, so cosmically significant that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned it in the Quran, not in a long chapter, not in a detailed narrative, but in 4 short, devastating, unforgettable verses that shook the consciousness of every Arab who heard them. Have you not seen what your Lord did to the companions of the elephant? That question, that single question, was enough to silence an entire nation. Because every Arab knew exactly what happened. They had heard it from their fathers and their grandfathers. They knew the story. They knew that Abraha, the powerful, arrogant, ambitious Abyssinian king of Yemen, had built a magnificent church in Sana'a and wanted all of Arabia to come to it instead of the Kaaba. And when the Arabs refused, when they showed their love and loyalty to the sacred house of Allah, Abraha made a decision that would seal his fate for eternity. He gathered his army. And not just any army. He brought war elephants, massive, terrifying creatures that had never been defeated on any battlefield. He marched toward Makkah with 60,000 soldiers, with 13 elephants at the front, with the full confidence of a man who believed that nothing in this world could stop him. He was about to learn what happens when a human being tries to challenge the plan of Allah. The people of Makkah were terrified. They fled to the mountains. There was nobody left to defend the Kaaba. No army, no weapons, no warriors. Just the sacred house standing alone in the valley of Makkah, seemingly defenseless, seemingly about to be destroyed forever. But here is what Abraha forgot. And this is what arrogant people always forget. The Kaaba did not need human defenders. The Kaaba had the best protector in existence. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not need armies, does not need weapons, does not need worldly power to accomplish His will. Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather of the one who was about to be born, the chief of the Quraysh, went to Abraha before the attack. Abraha had taken his camels and Abdul Muttalib came to ask for them back. Abraha was shocked. He said, "You came to ask for your camels? Your camels? I am here to destroy the house that your people worship and your whole religion depends upon. And you came to ask for camels?" And Abdul Muttalib said something that became one of the most powerful statements in Arabic history. He said, "I am the owner of the camels, and that house has its own owner who will protect it." That was not just confidence, that was certainty, that was faith so deep, so rooted, so unshakable, that even before Islam, even before the final revelation, Abdul Muttalib understood something that Abraha with all his power could not comprehend. That there are things in this universe that belong to Allah, and nobody takes what belongs to Allah. Abraham marched forward. The lead elephant, the great elephant Mahmud, was pointed toward Makkah and it refused to move. It sat down. It would not walk toward the Kaaba. It would walk in any other direction, toward Yemen, toward Syria, toward the east. But the moment they turned it toward Makkah, it stopped. It was as if even the animals understood what human arrogance could not. And then the sky changed. From the direction of the sea, birds appeared. So flocks of birds, like nothing anyone had ever seen. Each bird carrying 3 stones, 1 in its beak, 2 in its claws. Small stones, tiny stones. The kind of stones that a human being would not even notice. But these were not ordinary stones. These were stones sent by the command of Allah. And when they rained down upon that army, upon those 60,000 soldiers and those 13 war elephants, the destruction was total, absolute and instantaneous. The Quran describes it beautifully. Allah made them like eaten straw, like the leaves that a worm has consumed from the inside until nothing remains but an empty shell. Abraha fled. His army collapsed. The man who came to destroy the house of Allah died in humiliation, his body literally falling apart piece by piece as he retreated. He never reached Makkah. He never touched the Kaaba, and the sacred house stood unharmed, untouched, exactly as Allah intended. Now, why does this matter so much? Why is this story told at the very beginning of the biography of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ? Why is this the opening chapter? Because of what happened next. In that same year, the year of the elephant, on the 12th of Rabi al-Awwal, in the city of Makkah, in the home of Abdullah and Amina, a child was born. A child who would not just change Arabia, a child who would not just change the Middle East, a child who would change every continent, every civilization, every language, every culture on the face of this earth until the day of judgment. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was born. And the connection between these two events is not coincidental. It is not a historical curiosity. It is a divine statement. Allah was saying to the world, I destroyed the army that tried to erase my house, and now I am sending the man who will fill that house with my worship for all eternity. I protected the Kaaba, and now I am sending the one who will teach humanity what the Kaaba truly means. The timing was perfect because Allah's timing is always perfect. Now think about who this child was. Think about the world he was born into. Arabia in 570 CE was a place of profound darkness. Not darkness in the literal sense, but moral, spiritual, intellectual darkness. Daughters were buried alive the moment they were born because families considered girls a source of shame. The poor were crushed under the weight of the wealthy and the powerful. Tribal warfare consumed generation after generation. Families killing each other over arguments that started decades before any of the current fighters were even born. Idol worship dominated every corner of the Arabian Peninsula. There were 360 idols around the Kaaba, the very house that Ibrahim alayhi salam had built for the worship of Allah alone was surrounded by stones and statues that people bowed to, prayed to, sacrificed to. The Arabs were not stupid people. They were intelligent. They were eloquent. They were gifted with one of the most beautiful languages in human history, but they were lost. They were spiritually blind. They needed guidance. They needed someone to take their hand and lead them out of the darkness. And it was not just Arabia. Look at the world in 570 CE. The two superpowers of the time, the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Sassanid Empire, were both deeply corrupt, deeply oppressive, morally bankrupt civilizations that were draining the life out of the peoples they ruled over. Humanity was in crisis. From east to west, from north to south, the world was broken and desperate for repair. Allah knew this. Allah always knows. And in His infinite wisdom, in His perfect planning, in His boundless mercy, He sent the solution. He sent Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But notice something extraordinary about how this child entered the world. His father, Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib, had already passed away before his birth. Some scholars say he passed away 2 months before the Prophet ﷺ was born. Others say it was a few months after. But the point is this, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came into this world as an orphan. He did not have a father to hold him, to raise him, to provide for him, to give him the worldly advantages that fathers give their children. What if we told you that this was not a tragedy? What if we told you that this was not a tragedy? Because Allah wanted to show the world something important. Allah wanted to demonstrate that greatness does not come from having the right family connections, the right financial background, the right worldly support system. Greatness comes from Allah. When Allah selects someone, when Allah chooses someone, when Allah decides that a person will carry the weight of an entire civilization on their shoulders, no worldly obstacle can prevent that destiny from being fulfilled. The orphan of Makkah would become the most influential human being in the history of the world. Not because of his wealth, he had none. Not because of his army, he had none. Not because of his political power, he had none. But because Allah chose him. And when Allah chooses, the entire universe aligns itself with that choice. His mother Amina, a woman of incredible dignity and character, raised him in those early years with love and devotion. She recognized that her son was different. There were signs from the very beginning, light, unusual circumstances, dreams, visions, The universe itself seemed to be acknowledging the arrival of someone extraordinary. He was given to a wet nurse, as was the custom in Arabia, a woman named Halima al-Sa'diyah from the tribe of Banu Sa'd. And the moment she took this child into her home, blessings began to pour. Her animals that were barren started producing milk. Her land that was dry started to flourish. Her family that was struggling started to thrive. Because when you welcome the mercy of Allah into your home fills with mercy. But then, at the age of 6, the second blow came. His mother Amina passed away while they were traveling to Medina. The young Muhammad ﷺ watched his mother die on the road back to Mecca. And then he was brought back home by a servant, an orphan, alone in the world, without father, without mother, in a society where such children had very little protection. His grandfather Abdul Muttalib took him in. And if you think about Abdul Muttalib, this man was the chief of the Quraysh, a man of immense authority and respect. And he treated this grandson with a love that was extraordinary, even by the standards of a loving grandfather. He would seat young Muhammad ﷺ beside him at gatherings where even his own sons were not permitted to sit. He would look at this child and see something that perhaps he could not fully articulate, but could deeply feel that this boy was destined for something far beyond anything the world had yet seen. But Abdul Muttalib too would leave. At the age of 8, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ lost his grandfather, and now his uncle Abu Talib took responsibility for him. Abu Talib was not a wealthy man. He had many children and many financial pressures, but he loved his nephew with a fierce and unconditional love that never wavered, even decades later. Even when the entire city of Makkah turned against Muhammad ﷺ, even when there was pressure from every direction, Abu Talib never abandoned his nephew. This is the early life of the greatest human being who ever lived. Loss, orphanhood, vulnerability, moving from home to home, from guardian to guardian. No stable family structure by worldly standards, no financial security, no powerful father standing behind him in the corridors of Meccan society. And yet even in those early years, people could see something in him. His honesty was so well known that the people of Mecca gave him a title, Al-Amin, the trustworthy. In a society where tribal politics and self-interest dominated everything, here was a young man whose word was his bond, whose character was his credential, whose honesty was so absolute that even his enemies could not find a single instance of deception in his entire life. Think about that. In a society built on tribal loyalty, on self-interest, on competition, a young man rose to such moral excellence that his very character became his identity, not his tribe, not his wealth, not his family connections, his character, because Allah was preparing him. Every difficulty, every loss, every moment of vulnerability was preparation. Allah was building within this man a depth of compassion, a breadth of understanding, an ocean of empathy that would allow him to reach every human being who would ever come to him, seeking guidance. The man who lost his father before birth would become the father figure to an entire civilization. The man who lost his mother at 6 would develop a compassion for orphans so deep that protecting them became one of the central obligations of the faith he would bring. The man who was moved from home to home, from guardian to guardian, would build a community so unified, so bonded, so filled with brotherhood that people who had been sworn enemies would become closer than brothers. This is the wisdom of Allah's planning. What looks like difficulty from the outside is often preparation from the inside. Now return for a moment to the year of the elephant. Return to that moment when the birds appeared in the sky and destroyed the army of Abraha. Return to that moment of divine intervention, that moment when Allah made it unmistakably clear that He is in control of this world and everything in it. Why was that the year? Why not a year earlier? Why not a year later? Why that specific year, the same year as the birth of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ? Because Allah was making a point that would echo through all of human history. He was saying the same power that destroyed the army of Abraha, the same authority that sent those birds, the same wisdom that protected my house, that same power, that same authority, that same wisdom is now sending to humanity its greatest gift, its final messenger, its last prophet, the one after whom there will be no other. The destruction of one army and the birth of one man in the same year was not coincidence. It was the signature of Allah on the page of human history. And here is what makes this story so relevant to us today. Sitting here in this time, in this age, carrying our own burdens, our own confusions, our own fears about the world and where it is heading. The same Allah who sent those birds to protect His house, that same Allah is watching over this world right now. The same Allah who chose a fatherless orphan to be his final messenger. That same Allah sees your situation, knows your struggle, understands your pain. The same Allah who turned the darkest period of Arabian history into the dawn of the greatest civilization the world has ever known. That same Allah is capable of turning whatever darkness you are living through into a light that will guide you for the rest of your life. The year of the elephant teaches us that Allah's plan is always bigger than human plans. That what looks like the end of something is often the beginning of something far greater. That when the world seems to be falling apart, it might actually be falling into place according to a divine design that our limited human minds cannot fully see, but our faithful hearts can absolutely trust. Abraha thought he was going to destroy the Kaaba. What he actually did was set the stage for the arrival of the one who would fill the Kaaba with the worship of Allah for all eternity. The enemies of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ thought his orphanhood, his poverty, his lack of worldly support would make him weak. What it actually did was give him a depth of character, a breadth of mercy, and a height of spiritual excellence that made him the most complete human being in history. This is how Allah works. This is the pattern of divine wisdom. And when you truly understand this, when it moves from your mind into your heart, from your knowledge into your certainty, you will never fear anything in this world again. Because you will know, as Abdul Muttalib knew standing before Abraha, I am the owner of my small concerns. And the things that truly matter have an owner who never sleeps, never weakens, and never abandons what he has chosen to protect. The year of the elephant, the birth of the final messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. 1 year, 2 events, 1 message that will never fade. Allah is in control, His plan is perfect, and His mercy arrived in this world in the form of a man named Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The seal of the prophets, the mercy to all the worlds, the one whose life, if you study it, if you absorb it, if you allow it to enter your heart, will transform you in ways that nothing else in this world ever could. We began with a question: what if the most important chapter of human history was the one you had never fully understood? And now, at the end of this conversation, I hope you have your answer. The year of the elephant was not just a historical event recorded in old books, it was a divine announcement broadcast across time to every generation that would follow, including ours. The destruction of Abraha's army and the birth of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in that same year was Allah's way of saying, I am clearing the path, I am preparing the world. I am sending my final gift to humanity. And that gift, the life, the character, the message, the example of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is not something that belongs only to those who lived in 7th century Arabia. It belongs to every human being who has ever asked the question, why am I here? What does my life mean? And how do I live in a way that truly matters? The orphan who became the most influential man in history, the fatherless child who became the father of an entire civilization, the man who had nothing by worldly standards and gave everything, peace, guidance, truth, mercy, to a world that desperately needed all of it. Study his life, not as a religious obligation alone, though it is that, but as a journey into the most beautiful, the most complete, the most transformative example of human existence that has ever been placed before our eyes. Because when you know him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know what a human being is truly capable of becoming. And when you know that, you will never settle for anything less.